Hello everybody and welcome to this web chat today with Tim Reynolds. Tim is our UK Sales Director. So if you're not directly involved in app development and support, can you explain why config data is so vital to roles such as head of security or cybersecurity, for example?
Well, security and risk is obviously a really topical area at the moment. There are examples in the newspaper every week of people's data being lost or exposed, and obviously the implications are absolutely huge, not just in terms of fines, but also in terms of the bad publicity that companies receive as well. Configuration data is actually a really important risk. It's a hidden risk. Probably people in those positions of risk are not aware that there are thousands upon thousands of passwords that are quite likely to be in open text inside configuration data. And those passwords will be individuals' passwords. They could be passwords to access your HR systems, your finance systems, your main trading systems, lots and lots of very, very important information which should not be in full view of anyone. And it probably currently is. And that's not because somebody is doing it on purpose. It's just because they're making mistakes and they're not encrypting those passwords. So even though you're in risk and you think that systems and configuration data and all that sort of thing is the responsibility of IT and nothing that they should worry about, you'd be very surprised and you'd be very wrong. It is a really important area which they should take a look at.
I guess another area which is really important is the idea of an efficient left to right flow. So why is that so important to the success of modern application estates?
So what's the biggest cause of incidents? The biggest cause is actually change. So every time a change goes into a new system, there is a likelihood that something will go wrong. Now, a lot of measures are taken to try and prevent that happening. There's a lot of testing goes on before something goes into a production system. However, it does happen, and the reason it happens is because there's a change, some sort of change has been input into that system. Now, in modern companies, the rate of change is increasing. It's increasing because there's a demand for it to increase because companies need to respond to market conditions. There's an expectation it's going to increase because they're told that things such as DevOps will allow you to increase the rate of change. But whatever the reason is, there's a much bigger rate of change going on. Now, if you can't create an efficient pipeline from development to delivery into production, and by efficient I mean it goes faster and faster, but the quality doesn't fall. If you can't do that, you're going to increase the number of incidents, and what that will do is it will cause you'll be in the newspaper, you will have customer dissatisfaction, you'll have fines, you'll have whatever the implications are. But without creating an efficient left to right pipeline from development into delivery into production, you're going to be faced with a huge problem.
So I suppose with regard to that pipeline then, what happens when defects do creep in, and then it's only visible, I presume, once the code's been deployed?
Okay, so that's a nightmare scenario. So I've spoken to many people in application support who tell me that they're woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning. They have to come away from parties that they are attending, weddings, christenings, you name it. Because something has gone wrong. And the reason why that happens is because the company that they work for has basically issued an alert, an alarm that's gone off. If they can't fix the problem very, very quickly, bad things happen. So for example, if in a bank something goes wrong with their system and it's a production outage and it affects the customer service, they have to report it to the FCA. The FCA want a full investigation, and there are potentially fines, and obviously there are huge implications in terms of their integrity and their reputation. If you are a public organisation such as HMRC and people can't issue their tax returns on the 31st of January, then you probably end up on the red sofa on breakfast TV the following day. So it's really is a it's something which they want to avoid, is finding problems once they're in production, because the implications of what's going to happen to their company or even to individuals are fairly negative if that situation is allowed to happen.
Yeah, right. Huge impact. So, how can we work towards better and faster detection of errors then?
If you as things become more complicated, what you're not going to be able to do is handle this with more people. As things become faster and more rapid, and systems become more complicated, and they're not going to become less complicated. Less complicated is mainframes, which we had in the 1980s. The architectures that we have nowadays are extremely complicated. They're spread out amongst different environments, different applications working together, different teams in different time zones. That change and that rate of change means that it's only going to become more complicated and more difficult to figure out what's happening in systems and what's going wrong with systems. The only answer really is to use technology to do it, in my view, and automation. So things such as machine learning and AI can be used to detect problems before they actually happen. And I think ultimately that's really where the industry will lead more and more. So we'll be looking back in 5 years from now and saying, do you remember when Bill used to look at his computer and look at all of the hundreds of lines of configuration data items and try and compare it to the hundreds of lines of configuration data items that were there last week, and trying to figure out what had changed? And they'll be kind of laughing at that scenario in 5 years' time. In 5 years' time, it won't be done by Bill, it'll be done by a machine. The machine will tell them what's changed and probably how to fix it as well.
I guess with that level of complexity then, so when you have high performing tech organizations, what boundaries should we put around the various DevOps functions which would prevent defects from moving downstream, but also allow a high rate of change to be delivered?
It's an interesting question, because how much process or control do you want to put into the DevOps CDCI pipeline and the people that are involved there? Because if you put a lot of control in place, then you're going to slow people's work down, because they'll be constantly asking for somebody's approval, finding passwords. So half their day will be be used just trying to stay meet the controls. And if you look at developers and development shops, they're sort of creative people. They're given a set of requirements from the business, and they're asked to interpret it and then create a computer program. So what you don't want to do with these people is bog them down with lots of process and lots of controls, things that take them away from what you want them to really do. So the sort of controls that you should put in place are almost like guardrails. So if you're traveling down a road, a motorway, and obviously you want to prevent people from veering into the side and into the barriers, what you do is you have these little things on the side of the road, and if you drive over those, they sort of make a noise. Same thing applies, I think, to the developers and the sort of CDI/CI pipeline. You need to have controls in there which are almost invisible. They're not known, and they don't really interfere with their day-to-day work, and they only come into place when something goes wrong. So that allows them to concentrate on what they're good at.
Oh, it's a great analogy. I like that. And we all want to be in the fast lane as well, right? So, yeah.
Exactly.
So if you could give those organisations, if you could give them just one piece of advice, what would that be?
My one piece of advice, it would be automate, because I talk to people who are running DevOps teams, CDCI teams, environments teams, and what they say to me is that the pressure from the business to do more and do it quicker is growing and growing and growing, and it's the business will expect more, and in order to maintain competitive advantage in the sort of world that we have now, those companies that can't go faster and be more innovative are going to be the ones that will fail. So how do you do that? And the people I talk to, they say we can't keep up with the pace of change with people. We can't do it. We actually haven't got enough office space to put all the extra people in. We haven't got the capability of hiring all the additional people quick enough to meet the demands of the business. So my piece of advice would be to automate. Find every opportunity, look at every aspect of what's happening in the process, in the CDCI pipeline, and find out which ones are probably not the sort of thing that you want people to do, and automate it. Use machines, use tools to automate everything, and so that you can concentrate on what's really important and get your best people to spend all day doing important things and not be distracted on looking at log files and trying to find out where a problem is that's occurred in a system.
Yeah, because obviously when you automate, people sometimes get frightened that it's going to take people's jobs away from them, but actually it frees people up to fulfill other important things, doesn't it?
I don't think I've ever, rarely, maybe not ever, had an organisation which has said, right, this means that we can save 5 people, and they've actually got rid of 5 people. What they just do is they just find, they get 5 people doing much more productive work than what they were doing before.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's been really, really useful. Thank you so much for your time today, Tim.
Thanks, Emily.